commentary.
Hey, what's going on, man?
David, this is my
man.
brother Brock.
David, nice to meet you, man.
Nice to meet you too, Brock.
My pleasure. If you don't mind giving like a real quick background, because I don't know any of it. I wanted to hit this fresh so I could hear your story, and Luke was going to tell me a lot of the details, but instead of that, I'd love for you to just kind of walk me through the past concerning this in your case.
First of all, thank you for having me. I think that this is great. I think that it's great that you're doing this to inform people. I was born in Cuba in 1982. I lived there until I was like 10 years old. And things were pretty bad growing up, but they weren't as bad as they got later. Basically, what happened, just because of the USSR, they were like helping the country. So we had everything that we needed to survive in a sense. But then 1989 comes around, the USSR collapses. And then I remember vividly going one Friday to the supermarket and having everything that we needed, to going on a Saturday, and it was empty. And
Really?
The government took all those food supplies and everything. So it wasn't people going to the stores, watching the news and going to the stores and saying, we're not going to have any food. It was the government went and took everything. And from that point on, everything was controlled by the government. And here's what is so crazy. People in America don't understand. And I can try to make you understand. I can try to explain this to you. But we have it so good here that people here don't understand. The government control everything. Your socks, how many socks can you have? How many shoes can you have? How many pens can you have? How much food can you have? How much everything you can have. My family went ahead and my dad tried. He was a doctor. My dad tried to come to the United States in an inner tube, which was pretty crazy because he was a doctor. He was a highly educated man. You can never picture a doctor here in the United States crossing the frontier to go to Canada or to Mexico.
So what happened in Cuba that made that? I mean, obviously you're a doctor, you have a position of somewhat importance. It got so bad that he decided that he didn't want to be there anymore?
Well, yeah, just the fact that we didn't have anything. We just didn't have anything at all. And then, it's just an environment where you don't want to grow up. I mean, you have spies, people that work for the government, looking to see if there is somebody saying anything or somebody trying to escape. And then if somebody suspects that you are conspiring or saying anything bad against the government, then you're thrown in jail. There is not like a court process where you go to the court and then go through a case and then you get thrown in jail. You just get thrown in jail. So it's an environment that not only you don't have the bare necessities to survive, but you also don't have any freedom of expression. And I think that's what it really got to my family. It wasn't just that we didn't have the means to get ahead, but also you don't have any freedom to express yourself. I have to say also, my dad's dad, he was a plantation owner in Cuba prior to the revolution, and he actually fled to the United States in 1963 when all his lands were taken away, and he was being sat out by the government, by the Cuban regime, Castro regime, to put him in jail. So then he took off back in 1960.
So basically,
that's pretty interesting as well.
I know later on we'll get to that, but something similar happened to your family later on too. But they basically wanted to throw him in jail just because they wanted his stuff.
Well, they saw him as the root of all evil, right?
Because he was a capitalist.
Here's a capitalist man, a successful business owner, a land owner, and we cannot have this. We're going to send this person to jail just because he is who he is.
Unbelievable. It's so scary to me that we're flirting with some of that stuff. It is slow stepping it. I admit that. But would you say that's how it's done? I mean, in your case, it was like grocery store full, commandeered by the government the next Saturday. But do you see any like watermarks or reading the tea leaves? How do you end up there? You don't just end up there overnight, I guess is my curiosity. These things happen, frog in a hot pot. I think Americans just assume that our birthright will be freedom. They assume that our birthright will be liberty. We've never known anything else.
I'm just talking from my experience. The problem with with Fidel Castro being in full control of everything that happens in Cuba and the people in Cuba started in the 60s. So let me give you an example. So my grandparents on my mother's side, they were hunters. And in 1960, when Fidel Castro was already in power, he made everyone in Cuba register their weapons. And he promised that he wouldn't take the weapons away. When everybody registered the weapons, then he said to people that the only way that they can get ammunition is through the government, and they can only get like 10 cartridges. And any cartridges that were used, they have to bring the casket back to the government, showing that they used it and that they didn't lost it, and that they are not keeping those cartridges to make another bullets that can be used to have a coup. So, I mean, that is just an example. My mother's uncle, he was in the armed forces, the air forces in Cuba, and he was an old man. When Fidel Castro came to power, he just didn't want to continue doing that. He just wanted to retire. Well, the government of Cuba, Fidel Castro, they felt that he just wasn't in support of the revolution. So they threw him in jail for 15 years, where he was tortured, and he lost a leg as a result of being tortured. And, examples like that, there is hundreds of thousands, in Cuba. I mean, they control information that comes into the island. So the fact that Cuba, for example, didn't have internet, now we have internet, is still controlled by the government. But the fact that Cuba didn't have internet when the rest of the world were enjoying the internet, it wasn't because of an embargo that United States placed on Cuba. It was because Fidel Castro was trying to control the information that was getting into the island. Because if Cuban people had information to what's happening in the outside world, that would be a reason for people to actually rise up and say, hey, we want change. We don't want you here anymore. So he controlled all of that.
Because right now there's this huge propaganda campaign right now about Barack Obama's diplomatic relationships and all these different things. But imagine what it would require for a human being to get on a life raft. That's not even a fair way of describing this. Basically braved the sea.
It's 90 miles.
Not knowing, hey, by the way, you're going in the middle of the night. You don't know where you're going. You don't know if you're going to land back in Cuba. You don't know if you're going to land in Mexico. You don't know if you're going to land at all.
Imagine psychologically what has to be behind you in your rear view in order for you to do that. So this idea that people are floating now, that the argument, if you listen to some of these alphabet soup, statist media outfits that we have in this country, acting like the Castro brothers are playing patty cake down there, and that they're kind of cool because they get to keep their people in check. It's just preposterous.
Well, I found it remarkable that you were citing dates before you were born, because American people, they just don't do this. History doesn't start until their birthday. The fad history is really what they know. But you were citing events because obviously those are important events long before you were born. Cuba, they think that basically because of Michael Moore, it's just crazy, awesome free health care, and everything's equal. That's what they think. And they think that, and I think by Barack Obama opening up relations, opening up all the diplomatic relations, and then getting rid of
without any concessions.
And that is my problem. Because the question is, should we open relationships with Cuba? I think that we should. Just like when Luke was living right next to me, I reached out to him, he reached out to me. As a neighboring country to the United States, should we have good relationship with Cuba? Yes. And that is what the media is using to appeal. It's been too long. We have to have better relationship with Cuba. And I think that we should. But the problem is that we are doing this without them meeting the requirements for the embargo to be lifted. And that is my problem. To the day, Cubans don't have any human rights. The human rights are being violated every day. In Cuba, if you are gay, you are thrown in jail just for being gay.
If you're gay in Iran, they throw you off a roof.
They kill you, yeah.
Right.
Jehovah's Witness, you are Baptist, you are anything like that, you're thrown in jail. So that is one thing. Another thing, there is a lot of political prisoners from the United States and from Cuba that should be released before we talked about lifting an embargo. Another thing that I think that is huge is they need to make a road for elections, democratic elections, real elections, where other presidents, other parties can be formed, and other people can be presidents of the country. So that to the day hasn't happened. And I think that the biggest thing to me is the threat that they present to the United States. And a lot of people think here that is rhetoric from the Republican Party and the right-wing conservatives and stuff like that. But this is another thing that Americans don't understand. And I say this mostly about Americans that are liberals or left-wing Americans, is that there are people out there, there are people in other countries that they just don't like us. It doesn't matter what you do. You can say, we're going to give our ways. We are going to do away with corporations. We're going to do away with oil. We're going to do away with everything. We're going to cease to exist as a nation. They will still hate you just because you are American. And what you need to understand is that Cuba, and not the Cuban people, but the Cuban regime, the Castros, happen to be one of these people. They just don't like you. They just, they hate everything about America. And they pose a threat to us.
collegeculture.net